Hello there, welcome. This is the Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the ranting part. This is a speed review for a game called Canopy Evergreen. Now, if Canopy rings a bell, you might remember that I'm not certain if I did a full review for this. I'll have to double check. I'll put a link up if I have. But I have talked highly about a game called Canopy. This is from Weird City Games, from Tim Eisner, and illustrated by Vincent Dutrait. And I swear, I think this is probably the best thing I have seen Vincent Dutrait draw. The artwork on this box cover and on the cards is some of the most beautiful artwork I have ever seen in games. It really is that gorgeous. This was a 9 out of 10 game for me. You play this solo or 2-player, and it was this great game about having to build up an ecosystem full of plants, wildlife, and trees and such, and they scored in different ways, but you chose your cards based on looking at a pile of cards, deciding if you wanted it or not, good and bad cards, and then if you took it, great. If you didn't and skipped ahead, the pile got bigger so that the opponent would have more to choose from, and there were 3 separate piles you went through. It was simple rules, and it was in a small box so you could take it anywhere. It was travel friendly, and I loved it, but it had a 3 to 4 player variant in there, and it wasn't as good when you played it 3 to 4 player. Well, now it's hard to get a copy of the original Canopy, or at least I haven't seen many copies of it. And so what they've done now is brought out a 4-player, a multiplayer focused version of it. This is standalone, so you don't need the original in order to play this. Most of the rules in this game and what you're essentially doing is the same as Canopy, but wherever possible I will mention little differences here and there. But the idea is that this one is meant to be more designed for 2 to 4 players. So it'll certainly be more friendly to 3 to 4 than this one. So I was keen to sort of jump into this because of how much I love Canopy, but then I'm also thinking, well, this worked brilliantly as a 1 to 2 player game. So is this also going to be a good 1 to 2 player game? And will the changes here, be better or worse than the original? And is this a game I even want to play with multiplayer? Well, I've given it the beans. I've given it the beans in 1, 2, 3 and 4 player modes. So, what's my verdict?
What am I, psychic?
The rules in Canopy are very similar to the other one. You are trying to amass the most victory points after 3 seasons, but the way it works is that between all the players will be a cone board with a different number of cards on them. And then what happens is that you basically have 3 that you're going to look at on maximum on any particular turn. The one in the middle, 1 to your left, and 1 to your right in between the players. You'll take a look at the different cards that are in there and decide whether or not you want to keep the cards that are in this pile. I've got a tree base, I've got a pine cone, and a heat wave, which is not a particularly good card. So I'm like, do I want to take these? Well, if you do, you gotta take them all. You can't leave some of the bad ones behind. But let's say I take them, great. I lay them out in front of me and resolve their effects. But let's say I don't want to take it. Well, I'm like now when I look at this pile over here. Add 1 card from the stack from that particular round, and then look at the next pile and go, ooh, 2 bases of trees. You know what? I'll take these. I can have 2 cool trees now. And then another card will come off the deck just to add to that pile there, but you've taken all the cards, so that pile is not as good for other players. And then what happens is that players will take it in turns to keep doing this until the stack of cards for the round will run out. In terms of what these cards do, well, there's a variety of them. Some of them are basically flower cards where they score points for various different conditions, like essentially a set collection thing. There is sun and rain cards where basically they have sun and rain icons, and whoever has the most in the round gets so many points, second most gets so many other points. You have tree cards, of which they come in 2 different guises. You have the canopy side, hence the name, and the base and trunk side, and basically one will create a new tree or extend one, and another one will cap it off and score points based on the modifier on the card. Also on the agenda is huckleberries, which generate you food, and food is tracked on your board, and at the start of your turn you can optionally buy wildlife. Originally in Canopy these were mixed in with the rest of the deck and you just got them like any other card. Now they're separated and you have a face-up tableau to pick from, so bumblebee, what's this, rough-skinned newt, as opposed to a smooth-skinned newt, I don't know. And spotted skunk, for example. They have a food cost as opposed to a different type of cost, and basically you pay the food, take the card, it goes in front of you. Some of them are end of round scoring, end of game scoring, or some special effect that you can trigger. They function similarly to how they did before, it's just now that they're a separate deck and you can gun for them. The round carries on until the stack of cards for the round has run out. As soon as that happens, there are a few extra little effects that can trigger off from various cards, but mainly you will score the VP based on what you've collected. So the sets of flowers, the wildlife that you've got that scores at the end of the round, your tallest trees, etc., the sun and rain tokens, all the cards are discarded. You then refresh the wildlife display, mix all the cards back together, create the new deck, and rinse and repeat for another 2 seasons. Once you get to the end of the game, there's a little bit of extra scoring from some wildlife cards that score at the end, but also the wildlife cards have symbols in the top left where basically if you create a chain of symbols, there's effectively like a little kind of like a little ring of the different symbols on your reference card, and basically if you can get all of them in a row with the animal cards that you've got, you'll score extra points. It's basically another glorified set collection, and that's essentially the game. Play through 3 seasons, rinse repeat with those sort of rules, total up all the VP and see who wins.
That's easy!
So the rules to this game are not particularly complicated, and if you want to add a little bit of extra oomph to it, then you can add these season cards, which basically you flip one over at the start of a round and it has some, like, you know, effect that affects everybody in the game. I mean, it's fine, you can take it or leave it really, but they're pretty easy to throw in, it's not a big deal. So first up, let's talk about the aesthetics. Well, just like with Canopy, the aesthetics are absolutely fantastic. The artwork is on par with the previous like Canopy set. I mean, it's Vincent Dutrait again, it's the same style, it's just a different region of the world that they've picked. One's like Eastern Pacific or something, and the other one I forget, Amazon rainforest or something, but you know, basically it all looks beautiful. The difference here though is that now you have effectively a 3D element because your backboard has tokens that can add to the value of the cards that you've been using for scoring, and as you create the trees from the cards, you basically create like a big tree sculpture in front of you on your mat, and as soon as you've got 2 decent sized trees next to each other, you take the token off the board and it adds to your cards and set collection for each round. So the more, like, the quicker you can create these trees, the more of these tokens you can get. That's kind of it for your mat. It's just it creates a nice little 3D look of having these beautiful little forest pieces. And, you know, the production value in here is pretty decent. The cardstock is, you know, decent enough. The boards are good quality. The tokens are fine. The only couple of little snags, well, before we get onto the snags, let's talk about the, remember my review of Shackleton Base where I talked about you know, how good tuck boxes were? Well, same applies here. Tuck boxes are fantastic as a storage solution, and it's no different here. Keep a few of the punch boards at the bottom. I do recommend you do that, otherwise it's a little bit too much space. But you know, you can keep it nice and flush, and this stores everything nice and simple. Base of the trees and animal tokens, player pieces, cards. Done. Easy setup. Does not take long at all to get the game started and going. The only thing that does drag the game out a little bit is having to get all the cards back together and reshuffle them and deal them all out. And even at the start of the game, to be honest, you know, depending on your player count, you might have to mix in or subtract all the 3 and 4 player plus cards out of the deck. That's a little time consuming, but you know, such is the way with these games. But the production quality is very good for not a particularly expensive game. But I think more publishers need to start using this whole tuck box thing. You know, tuck boxes can wear out over time, and certainly they're not going to be pristine as soon as you try to open it once. But you know, they do such a good job of just keeping everything in order without having to go through the crazy expense of having to buy an insert later, or the frustration and the hassle of having to put everything into bags and taking them all out and separating them. It's like, it's a cool system, and Weird City Games have been doing this. So remember my review for Leaf that I did, used a similar tuck box system in there, and it works just fine. And as I said, Shackleton Base, the Corpse, all in tuck boxes, works great there as well. So, you know, more publishers need to use this. But artwork and production wise, all really stellar. So gameplay wise, how does it really compare to the original Canopy? Well, from a 1 to 2 player perspective, not a huge amount of difference. The solo mode has you going up against a fox spirit, and basically the fox spirit just sort of, like, you know, based on its own criteria, takes cards from certain piles and, you know, gets in your way, scores its own VP, and you're just basically trying to beat it. It's pretty straightforward, and it does make for quite a nice relaxing little game. It ignores half the rules in it. It doesn't, you know, care about, you know, trying to get tokens and things like that. It's just trying to build trees and such. So it's a little cheaty, but no, it's a nice simple little AI. 2-player functions very similarly to how it did in the previous one, certainly with the case of how many of these boards you're picking from. When it comes to 3 to 4 player, I will say that the 3 to 4 player in this works a little better than in Canopy, but it's basically mainly just the fact that you've got more of these growth piles on the board and they're between players. But for the most part, you're only going to interact with the one in the middle that everybody does, and the 2 to the side of you. So in a 4-player game, there will be one growth pile that you will simply not touch. There might be one card effect that lets you put a token on the pile or something, but otherwise you're never going to look at that pile ever. And even then, there's not a ton of interaction in this game per se. You know, whatever I'm doing isn't necessarily affected by what you're doing, apart from what you do with the growth piles as, you know, as and when. Like I say, it's not devoid of interaction. You do want to keep an eye on each other's board to see whether they're likely to buy wildlife cards that you want. The sun and rain tokens in the original game were just a set number of points, whereas here now it's icons, so you're trying to see, well, hang on, you've got more sun than I have, you've got more rain than I have. So a little bit of extra interaction is thrown in, but not loads. You know, it's not, you know, not tons of it there. The board aspect, again, I can kind of take or leave. I like the tokens that you can acquire to make your set collections better, but I don't desperately need to be creating a 3D forest in front of me that you can easily knock over. And these counters slide on these boards quite easily. So, you know, your food is one thing, but the victory point counter with this tiny little cylinder for the 10s or something, it is very easy just to, yeah, knock your thing and suddenly your markers have fallen off. So tracking your score is a little bit of a trust exercise with some players who are a little bit clumsy with their board, because these do slide around a bit. But it's neat, but I don't think it's like a massive elevation of the game. The wildlife cards being separated, I like it, and half of it I don't. I mean, I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I was fine with the original deck of cards having the wildlife ones included, but, you know, if you read the designer diaries for this, you know, they couldn't make the deck ridiculously huge. They had to find a way to trim it down a bit, and this is how they've done it. You do have, you know, cool, easy ones like, you know, like score points for this, or flat out points at the end, although when you're scoring in the region of 98, you know, 100 points or something, spending food on a card that simply gives you 2 points at the end of the game doesn't feel that lucrative or that interesting. And, you know, you might buy a card that gets you points for a particular type of thing, but then you might not see that type of thing a lot during the game, and so it doesn't, you know, do a lot. The effects, you know, they're pretty decent. They allow you to do shenanigans with the cards and that. I think some of the starter ones are a little bit better than others, shall we say. But, you know, for the most part, the wildlife deck is fine. But again, I kind of liked it, you know, being mixed in with the other cards. And I suppose that's the one negative I do have. In Canopy, everything was mixed together in a deck, so you had a lot of different cards, and in the advanced variant in the Canopy, you had a lot of different wildlife there, including the tarantula. Hate that card. But, you know, they had a lot of different cards that you could mix in, and so there was a lot of different ways that things were scoring. And, you know, the trees were still like a big race and everything like that. You know, the bigger forest, the bigger tree and such. With this, having the wildlife deck separated only leaves you with so many cards in this deck. And because you're using all the cards all the time, there's not a huge amount of variety in here. I mean, you see everything that's going to appear in the first round of the game, and you've got to do this 2 more times. So you know that there's going to be mushrooms, you know there's going to be the salal and trillium huckleberries and stuff, and sun and moon and cattail moss and tree cards. I mean, there's no sense of like real variety game in there. I think there was a little bit more in the original Canopy. So you're going to see everything that's in this game, and the main thing that will give you a little bit of variety is the animals, but only up to some extent. And stuff like having the chain of icons, you know, the chain animal symbols to score points, feels very mechanical. It almost feels like it was tacked on at the end. You know, we've created a wildlife deck of cards, and we need another way to score in this game. I don't know, let's put some arbitrary icon chaining and score points for that. It's a weird little system. It's not very difficult to achieve, honestly. I mean, you can achieve most of a chain of wildlife without really batting an eyelid. You have to go out your way a little bit to get the full run, but, you know, most people will get, you know, 4 to 5 in a chain, which is about 5-8 points. If you get a full one, it's 17 points. It's not bad, but it's not tons more. So, yeah, I'm kind of in 2 minds about the wildlife being separated and that. But the game is very simple. The rules will take you no time to learn. I mean, it is just, you know, you've got a good 1 sheet for the solo mode, so that's nice and quick. You've got very good reference aids, which will tell you what the certain different cards and icons do. If you're into looking at card frequency tables, it's on here. Honestly, I've never really looked at card frequency tables in any game I've played. I don't take the game seriously enough to care about that. You've got the wildlife glossaries here, but You know, the rule book has a decent amount of pages in it, but that's because it gives you a lot of pictorial examples, and the rules are straightforward. If you've played the original Canopy, you already know 90% of these rules. They're going to be familiar to you. But if you've never even heard of Canopy and you jump into this, it's still not going to take you very long to read this book and get stuck in. And because the 3 rounds play basically the same, once you've done round 1, you know what you're doing for round 2 and 3, so you can just keep on going. This is definitely maybe not something I want to throw in front of like brand new gamers, but I think once somebody's played their first game and gets an idea of what board games are about, you could throw this in front of the next people and they do just fine. Or maybe just accept that if you're going to play this with your parents or something, it just might be a little bit of a learning curve at first. Although I am tempted to, I don't know if my 70-year-old plus parents would really get this. Maybe that's going a little bit far, but not complicated at all. So in sort of summary, I'm kind of thinking like, well, which one do I prefer out of the 2? Because I can't see that you would keep both. They're too similar. Yes, there are subtle changes between the 2, but the core mechanic is the same, and I do enjoy the core mechanic. It is the whole, like, I'll take a pile of cards here, and it's like, oh, do I want this? But if I put another card on there, you're probably going to take it, which means I'm not going to get these cards back. But what's under that pile? I remember there was a sun card down there, and there's a rain one as well that would boost me, but you know, you're left with that choice, and it's a cool, you know, decision to make. You know, that is still in the game, and that is still really cool. But I was kind of hoping that this would like elevate itself to the point where I'd say, oh, you don't need Canopy anymore. You know, you can just completely disregard this, whoop, and it goes, and you're done. But I don't think it quite gets to that level. The changes that are made both add some cool new stuff, but also detract in other areas. So it kind of balances itself out like a proper ecosystem, I guess. But in terms of which one I recommend, I mean, I recommend both, honestly. I think both are really cool games. But if you were to, you know, put a gun to my head and say, well, which one of these 2 would I pick to put on my shelf and keep? I think I would say I'd keep the original. Because the problem is with multiplayer in this is that, 1, there's only so much interaction anyway, and also the time length. And I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, but the game is probably a good 20 minutes, you know, per player. And if you play this with 3 players, I think that's actually fine. But 4 players, this starts taking around the 90-minute mark. And there's nothing really to do when it's not your turn. So there is a bit of downtime. And so 90 minutes for a game like this, that's that simple, I'm not convinced that that's a good idea or like a good length. So really, I would cap this at 3. But I already had a game that was great at 1 and 2. So am I really getting this just so that I can play it at 3? I don't know. I'm not convinced. You know, like I say, I still think it's good. I still think it's a really good game. I think it's a really good, you know, game to play with lighter people or just to marvel at how pretty it looks. But I already kind of like this, and I can't review this kind of in a vacuum personally. I mean, if you cannot find a copy of Canopy at all, let's say this is completely gone from your ecosystem and this is the only one you can get, then by all means grab it. I would give it a, you know, I'm certainly going to give it a solid, oh god, I gotta start thinking about the old one. That's the thing, the old one is not always available. I'm going to give Canopy Evergreen overall an 8 out of 10. It is a great game. It is very simple, very light, very pretty, good solo mode, and, you know, it's just a pleasant game, but I probably wouldn't want to play it at 4 too often. It's kind of hard to gauge it. I personally think Canopy is the better of the 2. If you can get it for 1 and 2 players, get it. Fantastic little game. But if you can't find it, then by all means grab a copy of this one because it is still a really cool game. If you're planning to if you want to play this 3 and 4 player mainly, then you're definitely going to want this rather than this one because I think the variant in this isn't as good as this game as a whole. I think this one is much better from a multiplayer perspective. And solo mode, I can kind of take or leave. The Fox Spirit works fine, so does the one in this. But as I say, the compactness of this, you know, everything just being cards, is a little bit better for me. So it's kind of a weird review, but what I'm trying to say is that this is a very good standalone game. But it really is down to your preference, what it is you want from the game, how many players you're going to play it with, which one of the 2 you get. I still recommend either of them. I think you should definitely have at least one of these 2 in your collection. Pick your poison, you know, 1 and 2 player more compact or 3 to 4 player more involved, then, you know, choose. But certainly the Canopy games are great to have. They are gorgeous, they are pretty, they are simple, and they're just pleasant little games. So definitely recommend it, just choose.
Choice. The problem is choice.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell so that you're notified about more videos, because I tend to put them out on a regular basis. Don't forget to check out other videos that I've done. Thumb this one up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek if it goes live on the website if you're a viewer of that page. And let me know your comments down below. Do you like both of these games? Do you own both? Did you keep one? In which case, why did you keep one over the other? Which one is your preference? By all means, let me know all your thoughts down below. You don't need to say that the game is gorgeous. I already know it is. Until next time, remember, regardless of whether you prefer to have your trees laid out in card form or in pretty little sculptures, it's still only a game. So bye for now.